It's the week ending Saturday, the 15th of June, and this is the Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the British Parliament failing to stop the prospect of a no-deal Brexit, citizens of Hong Kong protesting China's grip on the province, and the Women's World Cup bringing in record TV ratings for female football. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team are Arion McNicoll and Rebecca Gillie. And down the line from, well, let's find out where, it is comedian Bassem Youssef. Hi, Bassem.
Hey, guys, how are you?
Excellent, thank you. Arion and Rebecca aren't allowed to speak at this point, so they can't give you a reaction, but they're smiling. Where are you?
Right now, I'm in Portugal. I'm kind of like I'm doing a small European trip before I come to your part of the world, the lovely, sunny, very warm, very springy London.
Yes.
Because I have a show in 6 days on the 19th of June, bringing my Middle Eastern humor using an English language, the language of the infidels, for all of the people of the Western Hemisphere.
Look how succinctly he promoted his own show, but somehow made it feel like editorial.
It's kind of like, as we call it in the United States, I'm just plugging it in.
Bassem, listeners may know you, amongst other things, for your friendship with Jon Stewart, the US comedian. Remind us about how that came about.
Well, my career started as a heart surgeon. I was a heart surgeon for kind of 19 years of my life, and I kind of like got bored because it was not challenging anymore. So we had kind of a revolution in Egypt, which, as you know, kind of like went down the drain. But the good thing that came out of it is that it kind of had an explosion of creativity in the media. I was always mesmerized by Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. And I started doing these little YouTube videos satirizing the state-run media in Egypt, which was calling the revolution an act of, conspiracy theory and whatnot. Kind of like think of it as if Sky News and Fox News married each other and had a very deformed child, that will be our media. And kind of, yeah. So and kind of, I was very surprised because the YouTube videos exploded, and now I'm having deals to do a a regular TV show, which I did. I left medicine behind, never regretted it, and then I became like a huge show. And then Jon Stewart heard of me. I came on his show, and he came on my show in Egypt, and we became kind of like, I have a really nice, good friendship. Although I'm very angry at him because, like, when he retired, he did not choose me to be his successor. He chose some other guy from Africa. So it's whatever. Still love you, John. So
he's a big consumer of the Week Unwrapped. I'm sure he's got the message loud and clear. Okay, well, time to return to our very tight format. So, Bassem, you are starting today's show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week we discovered that yoga is way too bendy for Islamic Sharia law.
Men and women in Iran are, first of all, not supposed to or not allowed to mix genders in sports. And yoga is considered a sport. And yoga in Iran is actually like completely, it's bad. Like, you're not supposed to be having any yoga class at all. So not only was this guy having a yoga class, but it was with men and women. So these women were dressed in yoga clothes, which apparently is now all of a sudden just terrible. And since they were in company with men doing this terrible yoga stuff, that's what they're referring to as acting inappropriately.
A report from last week by the Atheist Republic YouTube channel on Iran's raid of a yoga class. Bassem, what's going on this week?
Yeah, so basically Iran police arrested 30 people at a private yoga class in Iran, which is kind of like, it's a very weird sentence because it's one sentence which has Iran police arrest and a private yoga class. I couldn't even like imagine that you can actually form these kind of sentences. The head of police said that the people taking part in the yoga class was wearing inappropriate outfits. It's yoga pants. It's meant to be inappropriate. This is like why people go to yoga in the first place. And the thing is, this is not the first time that the moral police or the religious police in Iran does something like that, because a couple of years ago they banned Zumba classes. which is crazy, when especially when you read the reason why the police has banned it, they said Iranian sports authorities, mind you, issued a ban on Colombian dance or aerobics exercise called Zumba and any harmonious movement or body shaking instruction.
Yeah, exactly so. And I think that it all ties together with this broad renewed crackdown by the morality police. And this week, on top of all of this prevention of yoga classes and Zumba that's been going on, 500 restaurants, more than 500 restaurants were closed down across Iran by the morality or religious police, kind of wanting to do the same thing and prevent these sorts of immoral behavior that they see as being part of the culture of restaurants and cafes as well. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the update that's happened lately.
Why did they shut the restaurants down?
I suppose because, well, what they're saying is that these are places where men and women gather together, where people aren't necessarily maintaining the dress codes, that people aren't wearing the hijab correctly, and so on. And so broadly, it's kind of a crackdown on immorality generally.
Do you think, Bassem, this is basically just a threat from the government? You know, they make a small move. I mean, okay, 547 restaurants, that's a lot of businesses that are going to suffer, but nonetheless, it's not every restaurant. You know, they make a small move so that people change their behavior. It projects the kind of country Iran's institutions think they are. But actually, you know, in reality, people are going about their lives. They are finding ways, perhaps online, to speak to people of different genders, to wear whatever clothes they want behind closed doors.
It's kind of like they always remind the people that with the presence of the oppression. Everybody knows what happens in Iran underground. Everybody knows what is happening in all of these religious countries underground. They are not in the dark. But the thing is, like, every now and then they would do something as a kind of distraction. Because as long as you don't have enemies, as long as you have a problem, people will start to think about more important things. So they always make people worry about or get like wrapped into these like very trivial things, like shutting down a restaurant or shutting down a yoga class. It's useless and they know it, but it has always been a way of a distraction. And even in the Western world, we have the biggest distractor on the planet, Donald Trump. He distracts you with useless stuff. So it's always about distraction, making people think that, about trivial stuff without actually thinking about the bigger picture.
But I think it is also a bid by Rouhani's government to continue to find ways to control the sort of public response to the fact that the economy is getting worse. And this isn't entirely Iran's fault, of course. Coming back to Donald Trump, the violation of the nuclear accord by the US has meant that Iran has been subjected to new sanctions led by the US. But there has been this gradually gradual diminishing situation in Iran where people are just poorer, jobs are harder to come by. And I think that the re-establishment of codes of morality helps to create that sense of public control.
But does it work, Rebecca, for younger people? Because, you know, if Iran needs future generations to buy into Sharia law and believe that is the right way to govern the country, is shutting down yoga classes and cafes the way to get them on side?
Well, in a way, I mean, the very fact that those things exist shows that there is a demand for them. And it's obviously quite hard to get accurate polling information, but polls that I've seen suggest about 2/3 of Iranian women would like to see the modesty laws removed entirely, and about 1/3 are satisfied with the status quo. But, you know, the fact that this crackdown is happening shows, you know, conversely, that there is a problem with people not behaving in accordance with, you know, all these strictures. The Iranian government recently hired 12,000 new morality police, all female, working in 6-woman squads to try and keep other women in line. But that just shows that people are breaking the modesty code. A senior cleric recently said that women were walking around practically naked in the streets, which I haven't been to Iran recently, but does seem like an exaggeration. But it certainly does show that there's obviously this seen as being grounds to panic about this supposed breakdown in morality.
I mean, Bassem, you talked about Egypt earlier. Do you think this kind of thing could actually end up prompting a countercultural revolution in Iran?
Oh, well, here's the thing about all of these religious laws. You don't even need to go as far as Egypt. You just need to cross the pond, the little Persian Gulf, to Saudi Arabia. They just as a kind of an update this week. There have been a decision they are going to open the first nightclub in Saudi Arabia, but without the alcohol, which I don't see the point. But but the thing is, you have to remember, Saudi Arabia was in the front line of radicalism, and suddenly, I don't know if you have followed this or not. One of the most prominent religious scholars came out 2 weeks ago, and he said, you know, guys, all of these years where we were preaching kind of an extreme form of Islam and a very hardline interpretation of jihad and how you need to kill yourself, oops, we're sorry. Because we're very sorry for all of the suicide bombs, guys. We're cool now. And the thing is, this is just all had to come from a higher authority to tell you, guys, you need to change your brand of religion. So all of this is just fake. It is fake. Once it's about like changing what is up there in what is good for the political authority. They will use religion when they need to. They will use populism and national security when they need you. It's all fake. And the same thing happens with Egypt, by the way. People think that because the military has removed the Muslim Brotherhood, the military is more secular. The military is even as conservative as the Muslim Brotherhood. They're all using religion in different, because religion is this magical weapon that you control masses of the people. Because when I'm not looking, God is. So,
but it is the case, isn't it, Rebecca, that the majority of people in Iran are religious Muslims. I mean, they may have different private views about the interpretation of the religion and how that relates to Sharia law, or indeed whether Sharia law should be the law of the country rather than a separate religious code. But they are religious.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of the population identify as Muslims. Obviously, it's not a very easy culture to come out and identify as something else. But but I think there's just a huge gulf between the kind of very politicized form of Islam being implemented from above and the experience of the average person, especially as you touched on it earlier. The average Iranian is quite young, and I think that the majority of young people are looking for a more secular culture of the kind that you do see in some Muslim countries, places like Indonesia, Malaysia, where there is a bit more of a hands-off approach to introducing religion into the law.
2 years ago, there was a report that was published about Iran, and they say that 70% of educated young adults in Iran are actually identified as atheists. And there has been like accounts about like the secret life of Iranians and Persians and all of the what happens underground. It is lavish, and I think this is like a very thin, oppressive crust of authority that will not withstand that wave of secularism if their power was removed.
Arion.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's exactly right. And part of the reason why so many new morality police have been employed is because not only, as Bassem says, are you seeing this underground movement of people who want to continue to express themselves in a less oppressed way, but you're also seeing the movement of White Wednesdays, where women are going out in public wearing white often and then taking their hijab off. And partly even the introduction of all of these new officers was to try to counter that problem. So even though, as we're saying, that it is a religious society, there is still this resistance. And it's not just private, it's also public.
Okay, Rebecca, you're up next after this. Okay, Rebecca, your turn. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
In Ukraine, the servant of the people has become the master.
The strategic course of Ukraine to achieve full-fledged membership in the EU and NATO, which is secured in the Constitution of Ukraine, remains unchanged. This is the priority of our foreign policy. Ukraine's progress towards high European living and security standards is a demand of the Ukraine society.
That was the comedian turned president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking to the country on Monday. Rebecca, it's a remarkable story, his rise to power anyway, isn't it? But Zelensky was elected in April. What's new this week?
So there's a couple of things this week. One is that Zelensky has been in Brussels speaking to other EU leaders, his first state visit as president of Ukraine.
Is he trying to amend the backstop?
I think the EU leaders are probably really happy to have someone to talk about something other than Brexit with. And then the second one is that Ukraine's political parties have released their candidate list for the Ukrainian parliamentary election, which is being held on the 21st of July. Zelensky's party, which was only formed last year and doesn't have any representative in parliament, is on 34% of the vote, which doesn't sound like a huge amount until you know that Ukraine has 16 parties in the running and its nearest rival is on 8%.
And he's a leader with no party. And that means forming relationships very quickly, very publicly. Bassem, have you been following, I imagine as a kind of comedian with an interest in politics, that the Zelensky story has appealed to you? Do you think he's going to have the same problem as Emmanuel Macron?
I hate the guy. I hate Zelensky because I was a comedian in my country and I had to be kicked out. My show was taken away from me and I was accused as a traitor. And now this freaking guy, a comedian in Ukraine, goes in and win the presidency. So I'm so freaking jealous. And when I meet him, I'm going to tell it to his face. And I'm just like, I hate you, but dude, I love you.
But do you think, like, as someone who has to forge allegiances, he's in a very difficult position now? He's appealed through populism, but now he has to govern.
The problem if anybody's coming to try to break in the idea of politics as usual, he will have to hit the deep state. At the end of the day, the deep state is not just like a secret people doing stuff in closed rooms. It's just like it is the tradition of politics behind closed doors, between the parties, between the people in power. So the question is, can someone coming just because, like, depending on charisma, depending on his appeal to the people, can he make the changes? Can he beat the lobbyists? Can he do that? That is going to be a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah, and Arion, just as for Bassem, he's talking about kind of hardline Islamism shadowing any political ambitions he might have had. For Zelensky, it's the threat of Russia, isn't it? Yes, he's the president of Ukraine, not Russia, but I mean, it's all about their position, Putin's position on Ukraine.
I think that's right. And I think for any incoming Ukrainian president, they're going to be towing that fine line between not wanting to totally piss Russia off, who have obviously recently been pretty active, not only on the border of Ukraine, but within it. They took Crimea just a little while ago, and they're still subsidizing the civil war in the east of the country. So they really need to be cautious. Whoever is the leader needs to be cautious about Russia. But simultaneously, there is still a lot of pro-EU sentiment among the people of Ukraine. So really, for Zelensky, he's just going to have to do exactly what every previous president has faced, but at least his policies seem to take a different line. What he's talking about is trying to re-establish Ukrainian independence, still with a friendly attitude to the EU, still not totally contrary to everything that Russia has, but the proof will be in the pudding, and he's as yet an untested quantity.
And Rebecca, the rise of these populist movements across Europe, so you've got REM in France, Five Star in Italy, maybe the Brexit Party here at the next general election, who knows, depends what happens, doesn't it? What does that tell us about what voters want now?
Well, I think this is one of the reasons that this story has really caught my attention, is because I think we are seeing something similar here with the Brexit Party. And as you say, that's the latest in a long series of these grassroots movements that have just sprung from nowhere, usually led by a charismatic man. I just think it's fascinating to see, especially in this country where we've shuttled between the same two parties for the best part of 100 years, to suddenly see, I would never have predicted that it could happen here. You've seen some of the numbers that the Brexit Party's been getting, but some up to 30% of people saying they would vote for Nigel Farage's party in a general election. The point being, though, is that they all spring off of people who are unhappy with the way things are. And they don't promise anything specific. It's the same with Zelensky, is that his critics have said that his platform is actually pretty thin, and it's kind of, grounded in these broad sentiments of we need change, blah, blah, blah. And, voters end up projecting what they want to see onto him. And we've seen the same thing with Macron, who had a similar kind of meteoric rise. And he also was a president without a party for a while. And now he does have the majority of the power in France. But people hate the changes that he's brought in, and they're demonstrating against him.
One place where we haven't obviously seen the emergence of a new party is the US. And Bassem, as a charismatic guy over there, it seems like a market that is ripe for you to take control of. You don't need to be envious of Zelensky. Could you not start up a party of your own?
In the United States?
Sure.
I need to. I'm still trying to get my show in Netflix.
Well, Obama's managed it. What do you think it is, Bassem, that people do want, that voters do want? Why are they voting for these renegade, charismatic, but essentially untested men?
Because I mean, it's right there. It's people are just like sick and tired of politics as usual. And I'm not saying that politics as usual is all bad, because sometimes you need people who do know politics to get things around. But like the fallback of this is someone with like Donald Trump. I mean, I'm all for Zelensky getting there and being a comedian, and he's great. But sometimes you get someone like Donald Trump, you get someone like Farage or Boris Johnson or anybody who just like work on the anger of the people. They just like work it on their behalf. They make people like angry, and they use that anger to get there. So basically, and they're not like doing or providing any kind of solutions. They're just like projecting their hate to the system, and then people elect them, and then when they come to power, they make it even worse. I mean, look, for example, at someone like Donald Trump. He built his whole campaign about things like supporting the coal miners, supporting the American workers, supporting the American farmers, and his policies actually hurt those people. So it's all about like fear, hate, blaming your problems on the other, whether that the other was other politicians, other countries, other immigrants, other people who don't look like you, and that works. But then when they get the power, all they have got is anger and dissatisfaction, and I don't know how long can you use that to fix things.
I want to pick you up on that Boris Johnson point, Bassem, because you just lumped him in with some more extreme characters, and I'm curious as to whether you think that is how the Tory frontrunner to be our next Prime Minister is perceived overseas. He is just another Trump-Farage type figure.
He even looks like him.
Because are you aware that's probably not how the majority of the Conservative Party membership who are about to elect him see him?
I don't. All I know is like he seems to be like a stunt double for the guy who used to do a Little Britain if you put a wig on him. And but I don't know. The thing is, I can't say that I'm an expert of British politics, but these people have been like caught lying so many times and making untrue facts about why do we need to do Brexit, and I don't know how just like people like let go of people lying to them all the time like this.
But a lot of this, Rebecca, does come down to perception, doesn't it? So whether Bassem and people who see Boris like that are experts or not, the point is whoever ends up being Prime Minister is going to have to negotiate with the EU. I think a lot of people in the Conservative Party at the moment are hoping that Boris Johnson would be able to diffuse Nigel Farage. They'd be able to stop a true renegade coming through. He's actually an establishment figure with a sense of humour who'll rock things up a bit, but not too much.
Yeah, that's certainly what his, a lot of his supporters. I mean, it's a bit of a tragic thing because even the people who are backing Boris Johnson, a lot of the argument rests on, well, he'll be a rival to Nigel Farage. He's the only one that we can rely on to take away those votes from the Brexit Party, which is a bit of a sad way of, backing someone really, is saying, oh, well, at least people won't vote for the sort of fascisty one if we present the more acceptable face of Boris Johnson. But yeah, it is all about perception. And it's the same thing with Zelensky, who, I mean, listeners may or may not know, rose to fame playing a school teacher who ends up becoming president of the Ukraine after a video of him ranting against government goes viral. And Zelensky lived that out, and people have certainly glommed onto his persona and are kind of projecting their, wishes for what he's going to do as president based on what his character did on the TV show. They even played the theme song of the show on election night. It really showed this blurring of fiction and reality, which, to be honest, is a lot of time what populism is. This is just a very stark, particular example.
Okay, well, the true president of this podcast, Arion, is up next after this. And so finally this week, it is Arion. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This week, the Great Firewall of China just got a little bit greater.
There is a lot of debate in the West about the free flow of information on the internet. But in China, there is no debate. The government maintains tight control on what people inside the country can and can't see, making the World Wide Web not so wide. China runs the world's most complicated censorship machine. Many have joked that the Chinese internet is more like an intranet. It's a complex internet filtering system that China uses to block foreign websites.
That was Zhen Su of the South China Morning Post speaking back in May. So, Arion, we're back to China. What have they been up to this week?
This week, China blocked its citizens' access to several major news sites, including The Guardian, The Washington Post, NBC and HuffPost. And you sort of may wonder why they hadn't been blocked already, given that they are the sorts of sites that are likely to take fairly neutral, unbiased and not necessarily massively flattering lines as regard to China. But it also comes a couple of weeks after the country banned Wikipedia completely. And there had been some speculation that it was all coming about to prevent the reporting around the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. But actually, because it happened a bit later, the running theory now seems to be that it was in or connected with the protests of the new extradition law that's being introduced in Hong Kong. Either way, we're seeing this massive new crackdown and expansion of the Great Chinese Firewall, as it's called colloquially, which is the system that's in place within China that blocks people from having free access to the internet.
And it kind of takes us back to our first story and talking about young Iranians and what they understand is really going on in their country, because OK, you can stop the majority of Chinese people being able to access The Guardian, but I'm sure amongst the kind of whatever the Weibo equivalent of the Twitterati is, there are plenty of millennial Chinese who are well aware of what The Guardian is. Yes,
although interestingly, I read about a study that was conducted by the Peking University that where they somehow managed to get a number of Chinese volunteers to look at an unfiltered version of the internet after having been only exposed to a filtered version of the internet. And curiously, they found that of the 900 volunteers, very few of them had any interest in going to the sites that they previously hadn't been banned. So there's a sort of that previously had been banned. Sorry. So there's kind of an erasure that goes on from people who have only ever seen a censored version of the internet, and you wonder how much people will be able to sustain their interest in a news site after it's been gone for 10 or 20 years.
And also, to be fair, it's in English, which most of them don't speak. So, yep. I mean, that is a factor, isn't it? Bassem, I mean, how do you think China's crackdown that we've seen progress over the past few years compare to what's going on with Iran that you brought up earlier?
I mean, as someone who comes from Egypt, we're not very, censorship is not new to us. I don't know if you know this, but at a certain point, this year, Egypt has managed to block around, I don't know, a couple of thousand, maybe somewhere between 2,000 and 10,000 sites, websites. And because we're still not as efficient as China as in blocking Facebook and YouTube. We're working on it. If you want to do dictatorship, you might as well do it in the right way. But what I really find interesting about China, because China is kind of like a haven for human rights violations. They can put 1 million Muslims in concentration camp. They can block all kinds of websites they want. They can put whoever they want into jail. And kind of because they are buying and they are one of the biggest trade partners for everybody, the United States and the West. It's kind of that's too bad, China. Can you just do it while you're not buying our product? Can you not just do it while you're creating our iPhones? Because we need these things. Can you just do it in silence? Because we don't want to be aware of what you're doing to your humans, because we don't care about them, but we want to pretend that we do. It's just it's scary, how one of the biggest human violators in the whole world, we are fine with it. We are not brave enough to do sanctions on China like we do on Iran, because that will actually hurt us more financially more than it will hurt China. So it's kind of the whole hypocrisy of this, of how China can do whatever they want. It's just I'm talking about how we're supposed to be rooting for democracy, and our politicians talk about democracy and human rights. How do we react to that?
I mean, it's a question of scale as well, isn't it, Rebecca? No one wants to go up against the Chinese because of their sheer power.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's not even a case of, not just are we not actively opposing it and then imposing any consequences on China for its human rights violations, and censorship being one of them. But, our companies from the West are actively working with them. Microsoft already censored censors and removes things from its search results in China that the Chinese government doesn't want people to see. LinkedIn does the same. It's kind of hard to imagine how LinkedIn is regularly violating Chinese censorship, but apparently it is. And Google came under a lot of fire for their Project Dragonfly, which was going to be a censored version of the Google search engine for use in China. All these companies, defend themselves saying that they're just abiding by local laws, which is what they do in every country where they operate. But obviously, they came under a huge amount of criticism for essentially collaborating with an oppressive regime in order to continue the oppression of the ordinary people in China.
And Arion, you're seeing effectively the balkanization of the internet through this. China is one part of it, isn't it? But there's actually lots of territories all around the world that have their own bespoke versions of the World Wide Web now.
Well, that's it. And it's easy for countries to be sanctimonious towards China about their behaviors when, as Bassem says, there's censorship going on in Egypt, and there are corporations, as Rebecca says, going that are also contributing to or at least collaborating with what's going on. But, the internet is being censored in all sorts of parts of the world. Europe has introduced the right to be forgotten. UK is currently considering introducing age checks for accessing porn. In Australia, they're considering sanctions for social media companies that don't share user data when they think that someone's been up to something and they want to find out. So, what we are seeing censorship going on in so many parts of the world, and it isn't just China. And I think that we do have to be concerned about the establishment of rival internets that either don't even communicate with one another, so, China's is unplugged from lots of the services that we use, or then just completely shut down in and of their own right and start to control the sorts of information that they're showing to their own citizens.
Except, that policy that you talked about there of the UK government hoping to introduce age verification for pornography is actually quite popular amongst the general public, isn't it? So long as they don't feel that their details are going to get outed or they're going to be blocked from seeing what they want to see. Bassem, are there examples of these controlled mini intranets, if you like, that are actually beneficial, that stop content coming through that understandably governments don't want coming through, and that's because the people that elect them don't want it either?
Whether you draw a line in the sand, whether you say you can't do this, you are faced with two questions. Where do you stop and who draws the line? And why are they qualified to do that, make that decision on my behalf? And the thing is, the censorship is not just like about internet. So I would kind of like deviate from the subject a little bit. It's still about censorship. And I'm going to talk about like someone who comes from a Muslim country. We all have seen the whole thing about, the Danish cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad or the Charlie Hebdo, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of people doing boycott and wanted censorship. And I always tell like my Muslim friends, do you think that if you censored Charlie Hebdo, this will actually help? Don't you think it will explode somewhere else? Once you start censoring, that means, first of all, you're weak, that like a couple of posts or websites can actually like affect your faith, your power, your politics. Censorship never ends well. It has been tried before. It never ends well.
But what about for the people who actually are weak? For example, websites where people share tips on how to kill yourself.
How can you censor that?
Well, the government here has asked Facebook and Instagram, for example, to block posts from anorexic young women telling each other how not to eat.
Well, I'm a big believer of the very famous saying, the solution for bad speech is more speech. Because once you just like start into this road, you never know when to stop. Because now you can censor video games because they can make little children violent. You never know when to stop. I don't believe in censorship. It's an open society. We're 7 billion people, and yes, there's some downside to it. But I think the downside for censorship is much harder and much more harmful.
Well, the solution for free speech on this podcast, Bassem Youssef, is for me to dictatorially say that is the end of the show and there'll be no more of it. But thank you very much for joining us. If people want to check out your show when you do come to... Are you just coming to London or are you doing a tour in England?
Just London this time. London, baby. But next time, I might even go to... Wales? I don't know, whatever.
I might even venture into Wales. Okay, well, where can people come and see you if they are in London then?
It is in Logan Hall on the 19th of June. Basically, you need to just like Google Bassem Youssef, Logan Hall. and you'll find the tickets. It's on Eventbrite. So come to my show, guys.
Excellent. Pleasure to have you, Bassem Youssef there, and thanks as well to Arion McNicoll and Rebecca Gillie. That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped, our humble little podcast which continues to be available worldwide. Let's see how long that lasts. You can subscribe for free on your podcast app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.